They didn't see you coming, right? They felt their power was unrivaled, their systems invincible, and their hubris was forged in the fires of 1,000 little winds. They regarded you as a victim, a sad soul to be twisted and sacrificed in their never-ending game of greed and power. What they couldn't grasp was that you were not meant to play their game. You were sent to put a stop to it. This is more than just a judicial struggle. It is a prophecy for your own ascension, a witness to the divine force that burns inside the hearts of the underdog when they are pushed to the brink. Watch this till the finish, for the trip you are about to watch is a mirror of the one you are meant to take, a blueprint for demolishing the giants who stand in your way and recovering the inheritance that is properly, divinely, yours. You strolled into that courtroom, and the entire atmosphere crumbled beneath your presence. The temperature did not just drop by 10 degrees. The spiritual environment transformed from arrogant assurance to shivering, primeval terror. It wasn't because of the building's air conditioning. It was the frigid front of divine justice you carried within you. Every opposing lawyer, men and women dressed in costly suits and phony confidence, felt it in their chests like a subterranean tremor, a warning bell they couldn't ignore, a foreshadowing of their own imminent collapse. You didn't have to swagger or perform. You did not need to raise your voice or demonstrate your commitment. You just existed in that area, an anchor of perfect truth in a sea of their premeditated falsehoods, occupying the room as if you owned the land upon which they stood. A panicked voice began shouting in the deepest, most fundamental portion of their survival instinct, creating a chorus of terror from their ruined souls. Retreat, retreat, retreat. Unfortunately, it was too late for them. They were already engaged in, dedicated to a struggle that they had fundamentally misread from the start. The fact, which they would only understand after their demise, was that they had lost the moment you submitted your answer. They arrived anticipating an easy payout and a typical fleecing. In their views, it was simply another inheritance battle, another bereaved family member to force into submission with a barrage of legal language and procedural threats. Their pristine briefcases were full of pre-written motions, their paralegals were armed with cherry-picked precedents, and their confidence was dangerously inflated by 100 prior triumphs against individuals who didn't know the system, people who were too devastated by sorrow to fight back. They saw you as simply another number, another file, another lucrative tragedy. You, however, were different. You were picked for this. While they were learning how to manipulate the system, you were studying it as if it were a holy language tailored to your fluency. You did not simply study the law. You grasped its spirit and meaning. You discovered how they think, move, and conceal their flaws behind Latin jargon and the false spectacle of judicial decorum. So when the judge called the court to order, you didn't flinch. You didn't move your papers in a panic, clear your throat to appear prepared, or adjust the collar that felt like a noose around them. You sat in the profound, unshakable quiet of a heavenly entity who had already seen the end result and was merely waiting with divine patience for the rest of reality to catch up. The opposing counsel, a trio of high-priced mercenaries, continued casting looks at you, darting back and forth, attempting to read you, urgently looking for a flaw in your armor. Their fault was in the premises. There was no armor. You were the weapon itself, forged in the fires of righteous investigation, polished on the whetstone of holy wrath, and handled with the surgical accuracy of an angel. They came looking for a plaintiff, a crying victim that they could easily disassemble. What they got was a prosecutor with a personal grudge blessed by the gods, as well as a legal education they never expected, one obtained through tears, sleepless nights, and unshakable faith rather by tuition. When their main attorney, a guy whose arrogance was his most distinguishing quality, rose to make their opening statement, he plunged into a well-rehearsed routine. He performed his trained movements, used his controlled pauses, and began weaving a story of pity for the jury, building a picture of fraud and manipulation in which you are the villain. You let them speak. You observed with calm, almost detached fascination as they constructed their fortress of lies, one dangerous brick at a time. You allowed them to build their castle of untruth because you held something they could never obtain, the heavenly blueprint for their construction. You recognized every structural fault, every broken foundation founded on assumption rather than truth. 6 months ago, when they were celebrating their brilliant approach over costly lunches and congratulating each other on their genius, you were in the actual archives, where truth slumber and waits to be awakened. You were not depending on shallow Google searches or meaningless conversation instructions. You were deep in the past, digging out dusty, forgotten county records from 1987, the paper dissolving in your hands. You spent hours on the phone, chasing down and phoning distant relatives who had been discarded or forgotten, eliciting recollections from the silent corners of your family's past. You methodically compared bank statements to property records, tax filings, and the fading, handwritten notes your grandmother had left in the margins of her old address book, clues from beyond the veil. During that spiritual process, you evolved. You transformed into a forensic accountant, private detective, and legal scholar, all in one obsessive and anointed force of nature. They had 3 lawyers on retainer, a staff of paralegals, and the support of a reputable company. You possessed a righteous wrath, a public library card, and direct access to the ultimate wellspring of wisdom and justice. And somehow, you outworked everyone. Every night, when they slept blissfully in their nice beds, you read case law. Every weekend, while they were on the golf course, you interviewed witnesses they had no idea existed. You acquired obscure legal phrases like testamentary capacity and undue influence, not in the hallowed halls of law school, but in the harsh crucible of absolute need. You taught yourself how to submit motions that were so well-written and legally solid that courts would take them seriously. You presented evidence with such procedural precision that they couldn't find a single reason to complain. You arranged ideas in such a clear and persuasive way that they pierced through the rhetorical fog. You investigated their previous cases, detecting trends, favored techniques and methods, and understanding the rhythm of their deceptions. And in the painful, isolated process, you found something genuinely lovely, a secret they want you never learn. The law is not magical. It is a system, and every system, no matter how complicated or daunting, can be studied, exploited, and eventually controlled by anybody willing to put in the effort and align with the truth. These pricey colleges left them with debt, connections, and a poisonous attitude of entitlement. The public library, a temple of knowledge for all, provided something they could never buy: the lost truth. You recognized what they had lost in their comfortable, affluent careers. Desperation produces a laser-like focus, but a search for justice produces divine and irresistible determination. The combination of the two creates a tidal wave of force that their fancy suits and polished shoes could never have prepared them for. When you eventually filed your answer, it was more than just a legal response. It was a declaration of holy war, written in the legal code they thought belonged solely to them. 47 pages, single-spaced. A masterwork of furious rage and painstaking precision. Every single assertion they had made was meticulously and viciously destroyed. Every premise on which they had based their feeble argument was exposed as sheer falsehood. Every witness they intended to call was preemptively discredited with indisputable proof they had no idea you had. When their lead attorney finally read your letter, the color left his cheeks. He summoned an emergency meeting, which, according to insiders, lasted hours and was filled with yelling and terror. At that point, they recognized their deadly mistake. They weren't up against an amateur. They were up against someone who prioritized truth above billable hours. By day 3 of the trial, their arrogance had turned into evident worry. They hauled in their star witness, the estate executor, who had engineered the entire false operation. This is the person who claimed your relative was mentally incompetent when they amended their will. They portrayed themselves as a great guardian of the elderly, a selfless savior who kept your grandma from being exploited. You observed calmly, your pen moving over your notebook, taking notes while their lawyer elevated this witness to the status of unquestionable believability. And then the moment came. It was your turn. The air in the room shifted, crackling with an unknown force. You did not ask permission to approach the stand. You did not provide a courteous, deferential grin. You approached like a predator emerging from the long grass, eyes fixed on your victim, poised to attack. Your initial statement was not a question. It was a reality, stated with terrifying conviction. You testified that you visited my grandmother once a week for the last 2 years of her life, correct? The witness, still cocooned in their created confidence, nodded. Yes, that's correct. You stopped, allowing the stillness to fill the room. That's interesting. You said, your voice is polished as iron, because according to her phone records, the security footage from her building, and sworn testimony from her daily caregiver, you visited exactly 4 times in those 2 years. Would you like to revise your statement, or should we continue with you under oath, perjuring yourself before this court? The color had fled from their faces, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. The opposing lawyer, shocked from his sleep, rose to his feet yelling, "Objection!" But the judge, looking forward with sudden attention, simply stated, "Overruled. The witness will answer." You took a big folder from your bag and placed it on the witness stand. "Let's talk about the medication you claimed she was taking," you began, your voice lowering to a near whisper that everyone in the room struggled to understand. "The one that supposedly affected her judgment. You said she was on high doses of painkillers that made her confused." You handed a paper across the table. "This is her complete medical record, signed by her physician, Dr. Alistair Finch. It states she was taking low-dose aspirin and a multivitamin. No painkillers, no sedatives, nothing that affects cognitive function. So, I'll ask you again, are you simply mistaken about basic medical facts, or are you actively and intentionally lying to this court?" The witness hesitated, backtracked, and claimed to be confused about the dates. You leaned in closer, your presence filling the gap between you. "That's fascinating, because you provided a sworn affidavit, a legal document you signed under penalty of perjury, with specific dates and times, claiming you personally witnessed her confusion on those days. Were you also confused when you signed that legally binding document?" Objections shot out of the courtroom. The judge hammered the gavel, his voice shouting for order, but the harm was permanent. The jurors witnessed the truth. The bedrock of legitimacy was falling before their eyes. The witness was a phony, and their entire case was a house of cards in a cyclone. For 45 exhausting, soul-crushing minutes, you shattered every single piece of their constructed narrative. You submitted bank documents that demonstrated a pattern of illicit withdrawals from your grandmother's accounts. You supplied emails confirming their previous knowledge of the scheme and exposing their cooperation in their own words. You played audio recordings of nursing workers describing your grandmother's strong intelligence and funny humor till her death. And then, the ultimate, devastating blow, a handwritten letter from your grandmother, confirmed by 3 different handwriting experts, in which she described exactly why she amended her will and explicitly referred to that witness as untrustworthy and driven by greed. When you eventually stood up and declared, "No further questions," the witness appeared to want the floor would open up and swallow them whole. The opposing counsel did not even try to redirect what might be salvaged from the smoking wreck. But that brutal cross-examination wasn't your last strike. That was simply the first salvo. You'd reserved the nuclear option, the masterstroke, for your final argument. While they were preoccupied with this singular inheritance battle, you were quietly preparing a parallel case that they never saw coming. You had filed motions claiming fraud, elder abuse, and violation of fiduciary duty, both civil and criminal. You weren't just looking for a good verdict. You want genuine justice, a heavenly judgment that would reverberate far beyond the courthouse walls. You didn't need notes to deliver your concluding point. You did not require a script. You were conveying a greater truth. You gazed at the jurors one by one, connecting with each of them. Your voice was solid, full of unwavering assurance that echoed in their very souls. "This case," you said, your voice ringing with clarity, "was never about money. It's about respect. Respect for a woman who worked her entire life, saved every penny she could, and made clear, conscious choices about who she trusted and who she didn't." Then you paused, glanced at your wristwatch, and let the profound silence speak for itself. The opposing side wants you to believe my grandmother was confused. They want you to believe her mind was failing her. You stood straight, exuding power. Let me show you what confusion actually looks like. You then took out their individual filings and displayed them on the overhead projector for everyone to see. In their initial complaint, they claimed the will was changed in June. In their amended complaint, they said it was August. In their witness testimony just yesterday, they claimed it was September. Ladies and gentlemen, that isn't evidence of my grandmother's confusion. It's evidence of their improvisation. You walked the jury through a timeline so precise, meticulously documented, and utterly irrefutable that even the judge leaned forward, taking his own notes. You showed them the paperwork, the witnesses they never bothered to find, the expert evidence they couldn't pay, and ultimately, the video footage of your grandmother, recorded 6 months before her death, in which she plainly and lucidly articulated her wishes in her own words. You submitted the signature analysis, which demonstrated that the challenged will was totally legal. You presented damaging financial papers demonstrating that the executor had already started squandering the inherited money before your grandma died. And then, with a calm, firm voice that seemed to drown out all the noise in the room, you delivered the statement that caused 2 of their lawyers to discreetly begin packing up their briefcases in the middle of trial. Your Honor, members of the jury, you said, looking around the room, I'm not just asking you to rule in my favor. I'm asking you to send a message that elder abuse will not be tolerated in our community, a message that fraud has severe consequences, and a message that you cannot gaslight a grieving family and expect to get away with it just because you hired expensive lawyers. You allowed it to register. The quiet was electrifying and divine. These people thought they could use the legal system as a weapon to intimidate and steal. I am here today to remind them, and to remind everyone, that the legal system is, and always will be, a shield for the truth. You took a final breath. And the truth, you said, your voice vibrating with heavenly finality, is sitting right here in these documents. The truth is in my grandmother's own words. And the truth is about to cost them everything they tried to steal. The account of this conflict demonstrates the strength that is dormant inside you. It serves as a reminder that when you are in alignment with divine destiny, no earthly institution can stop you. If this message speaks to the fighter in you, then join our community of truth seekers. Subscribe to God Connection right now and turn on the notification bell, because we are assembling an army of light against the darkness of this world. Your trip is just beginning, and we will accompany you every step of the way. Something extraordinary occurred during the lunch break after your closing argument. The other side's main attorney approached the court, his face pale and his confidence broken, and sought a sidebar. You observed as they had a whispered, uncomfortable talk. The judge's brow rose in astonishment, then furrowed in serious displeasure, before he looked across at you with a mixture of great respect and bewilderment. When they returned to the courtroom, the lead attorney dodged your sight and made a frantic declaration. Your Honor, we'd like to request a continuance to discuss settlement options with our clients. Everyone in the room understood the translation. We are being methodically destroyed, and we need to halt the bleeding before it worsens. However, you were no longer interested in a settlement. This was never a financial compromise. This was about making moral corrections. You stood up, your voice strong and clear. Your Honor, the plaintiff objects to any continuance. We have been ready for this trial for 6 months. The defense has had ample time to prepare. If they are unprepared now, that is a result of their own strategic failure, not grounds for a delay. The judge, who was gazing at you, concurred. Objection sustained. The trial will proceed. That's when the second defense lawyer, seeing no way out of the inferno, abruptly stood up, apologized to the judge, and resigned on the spot, citing irreconcilable differences with case strategy. By the next morning, only one lawyer remained. The main attorney, pallid, tired, and plainly sleep-deprived, appeared to be haunted by his own failure. He filed a request to dismiss all of their counterclaims, withdrew half of their remaining witness list, and basically conceded on all key points save for minor technicalities. But you didn't give up. You called your final witnesses, including a psychiatrist who confirmed your grandmother's full cognitive function until her death, a financial advisor who detailed how the executor had been siphoning funds for years, and a neighbor who testified tearfully about the executor's attempts to manipulate and pressure your grandmother into changing her will. By day 6, the defenders had rested. They had no more witnesses, arguments, or confidence. Their whole approach, based on intimidation and deceit, had crashed right in front of everyone. And all you had done was state the truth, supported by a pile of evidence they never expected you to find. The defense's final argument was not a legal strategy. It was a sad, sobbing concession. The final surviving lawyer stood there, his shoulders drooping from defeat and his voice shaking as he addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man said, "emotions have clearly run high in this case. Mistakes were made, perhaps even serious ones. But let's not destroy reputations and lives over a misunderstanding." You were about to scream. A misunderstanding. They had attempted to steal a 6-figure bequest, gaslight a whole family, fabricate evidence, and conduct perjury, and he had the arrogance to label it a misunderstanding. The courtroom was filled with incredulity. The jurors, the court reporters, and even the bailiff recognized that what they had observed was not misunderstanding. It was a calculated, intentional deceit that was exposed by the unrelenting light of truth. When the jury went to deliberate, there was no tightness in your belly or doubt in your soul. You already knew how it would end. They returned 90 minutes later, just in time to finish their sandwiches. The foreman stood, holding the verdict paper steady in his palm, his eyes meeting yours with genuine regard. The courtroom sank into a hallowed hush. "We, the jury," his voice bellowed, "find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts." The words shook the room like an earthquake. Everything counts. Not simply a triumph, but whole and full vindication. Your full inheritance has been returned to you. But it was not the finest part. The jury had gone beyond what anyone, even you, had anticipated. They awarded punitive damages, a figure so huge that it was plainly meant to shock the legal community, sending a strong warning to anybody who may attempt such deception again. They granted you full lawyer's fees despite the fact that you represented yourself, a finding so unusual that it was later cited in legal textbooks as a landmark case. They even went so far as to formally suggest a criminal inquiry into the executor's actions, claiming that the facts you gave demanded further examination by law authorities. Then came the moment that immortalized the case. The jury foreman had, on his own initiative, included a handwritten letter with the official written verdict. The judge began to read it out loud. The court, and this jury, recognizes the extraordinary preparation, courage, and legal acumen demonstrated by the plaintiff in this case. What we have witnessed was a masterclass in self-representation and a cautionary tale about underestimating an individual's unwavering commitment to truth and justice. No one moved during the extended, almost sacred quiet. The last defense attorney sat transfixed, his eyes glazed with amazement. The jurors exchanged expressions of calm, profound regard. And the once arrogant executor, who had attempted to alter your family's tale for personal gain, was quietly led out of the courtroom by detectives who had been observing the trial from the gallery at your earlier request. The irony was lyrical and flawless. The hunter was drawn away by the system they believed they controlled. You did not speak. You did not celebrate. You simply breathed, slowly and deeply, feeling the vast, calm silence of a righteous victory. It was never simply about money. It was about validation. It was about recreating your own position in a system structured to quiet individuals who lacked institutional authority. You had entered a courtroom designed to favor riches and connections, and emerged with a ruling that supported truth. Every single hour you had spent in those silent libraries, every sleepless night poring through faded records, every long-distance phone call to a forgotten witness, it had all culminated in this one beautiful, unmistakable moment. When the judge finished clearing the courtroom, he summoned you to the bench. His expression relaxed. The severe authority had been replaced with something more like to real admiration. "Off the record," he remarked, dropping his voice. Where did you study law? You smiled, a genuine grin, unable to deny the truth. The public library, Your Honor. And spite. Mostly spite. He chuckled, a genuine, unfettered laugh that rang in the empty courtroom. The type that only comes out when respect overcomes formality. Well, he continued, his grin lingering. You've just done what most licensed attorneys spend their entire careers trying to do. You've proven that the law does not belong to institutions, but rather to anyone willing to learn it. You nodded, and he leaned in with a gentle, fatherly warning. Be careful. You've made a lot of powerful enemies in this field today. Lawyers don't like being shown up, especially not like this. You grabbed your documents, still warm from the courtroom lights. Good, you said calmly, your voice free of apprehension. Let them be afraid. Let them know that people are waking up, that we are learning their tactics and speaking their language. We're not intimidated anymore. The judge's small smile was the last thing you saw before walking out into the corridor, where a mob of reporters waited with flashing cameras and buzzing microphones. You walked out of that courthouse with something far bigger than your fortune and dignity. Incontrovertible proof that the system could be defeated by someone who just refused to give up. The news was taken up by the media before sundown. Legal blogs ran with startling headlines. Self-taught litigant shocks courtroom in landmark victory, and David versus Goliath, the inheritance case that changed everything. Legal observers named it one of the decade's most important self-representation victories. Law students from over the country began seeking court records to study your cross-examination tactics. Professors began praising your case as an excellent example of procedural clarity and moral persistence. Within weeks, your email inbox had overflowed. Families from all over the country were contacting you, reporting the same types of inheritance fraud, exploitative contracts, and legal manipulation. They wanted to know what you had done, how you did it, and how they might protect themselves in a system that sometimes appeared stacked against them. You discovered something deep at that time. This win does not mark the end of your fight. It marked the start of a new, heavenly mission. You remembered the judge's final inquiry. What are you going to do now? You already knew the answer. I'm going to help others do exactly what I just did, you told him. Because if I can learn this system, anyone can. And there are too many families being robbed by people who believe that expensive lawyers make them untouchable. The judge nodded slowly, his gaze distant but attentive. Then be ready, he'd said, because change always scares those who profit from the chaos. As you stood outside the courthouse, the verdict still booming in your ears, you sensed a fundamental shift within you. The argument was no longer personal. It was done collectively. You discovered something most people don't realize. The law isn't magical, it's structured. Structure may be studied, learned, and used by anybody who is willing to learn. That insight made you more dangerous to the crooked system than any lawyer on a corporate retainer. You came away not just as a conqueror, but also as a symbol, an untrained, underappreciated force who demonstrated that justice is not sold to the highest bidder. It belongs to those who refuse to give up. You had become someone the legal establishment never wanted to see, a competent pro-se litigator who not only survived, but outperformed their system. You were neither a one-time outlier or a fortuitous exception. You were a live, incontrovertible example of how regular people with patience, intellect, and a tenacious, divinely fueled resolve could defeat multi-million-dollar law companies. And it, above all, made you dangerous. Because if one individual can decode the system and exploit it with such lethal accuracy, so can others. You had dispelled the myth that the law was an exclusive, hidden language available exclusively for those who could afford the tuition, suits, and secret handshakes. You had transformed knowledge into an act of revolt. Your success has far-reaching consequences. The two lawyers who left mid-trial never recovered professionally. One quit totally from his company, reportedly because he couldn't bear the humiliation of being publicly destroyed by someone with no formal legal expertise. The second faded into obscurity, no longer handling high-profile cases, preferring to discreetly prepare contracts in a shadowy corner office, haunted by the specter of that trial. Within legal circles, your name became a whisper, a cautionary tale, the civilian who destroyed a firm's reputation. Meanwhile, the once respected executor, the person who attempted to use your family's pain into personal profit, saw their entire existence disintegrate, piece by piece. Criminal investigations were launched into elder financial abuse, perjury, and criminal fraud. Their bank accounts were stopped, their testimonies were subpoenaed, and their erstwhile associates acted as state witnesses overnight to save themselves. The empire they had built on dishonesty was disintegrating, one ethical infraction at a time. The case established a benchmark for both law schools and the media. Professors praised your files for their clarity and unwavering reasoning. Journalists referred to it as the trial that humbled the system. Commentators questioned whether you had revealed a deeper, more fundamental truth about the justice system, that it was never truly about expertise, but rather about access, and that the only difference between helplessness and power was knowledge. And you demonstrated that anybody eager to learn could use it. Law students began to use your cross-examination skills in internet forums. Legal bloggers titled their pieces after you. It was no longer merely a legal victory. It was a full-fledged cultural disturbance. However, for you, it was always more personal. You remembered when they had offered you that nasty settlement early on. 60% of the inheritance. Their smiles were professional, but their tone was full of disdain. "We just want closure for the family," they had stated, believing that their money would quiet your beliefs. But you knew something that others didn't. This was never a battle over bank account numbers. It was about the truth. It was about the holy concept that no family should be harassed, no legacy changed, and no senior exploited merely because the culprits thought their attorneys were better or more powerful. You declined their offer without hesitation, well aware that you were entering a conflict, but also understanding that sometimes a message is worth far more than money. And that message reverberated louder than anyone, including you, had anticipated. The age of intimidation is coming to an end. For decades, the legal profession's dominance was based on a closely held secret, the idea that the system was too intricate and convoluted for ordinary people to ever understand. You had single-handedly demolished that illusion in one magnificent public trial. You revealed the obvious reality that the law, at its essence, is public knowledge, that everything they try to hide behind high-priced paywalls and dead Latin words already belongs to the public. You demonstrated that complexity is not an indicator of intellect. It is a business strategy. Complexity keeps clients dependent, invoices coming, and the powerful in control. But justice is simple. The truth is simple. You had both on your side. Soon, your phone started ringing nonstop. Emails came in by the hundreds. People from all around the country reached out to you. Estate managers are gaslighting widows. Greedy relatives prevent siblings from receiving their rightful inheritances. Children faced deceptive trustees who were depleting their family's wealth. They all asked the same question. "I saw your case. Could you please help me?" They weren't searching for free legal advice. They were searching for hope. They wanted to think that the system was not indestructible, that the giants might be defeated. And you told them something that no attorney ever had the courage to admit. You can do this. The law belongs to you. The information is public. The procedures are written down. Everything you need is already out there. You just have to be willing to work for it. You told them that what the legal industry fears most is not competition from other lawyers, but public understanding. Because once individuals grasp the game's rules, the power imbalance is permanently resolved. When citizens begin reading what attorneys read, filing what lawyers file, and thinking like lawyers, the monopoly of fear is destroyed for good. And when the judge's gavel fell for the final time, it didn't merely signal the end of the trial. It signaled the start of a new standard. Your win became the narrative that every ambitious young attorney had to hear, and the case that every legal ethics professor cited when talking about the power and potential of self-representation. Your tenacity caused the system to examine itself in the mirror, and it did not like what it saw. Because the fact was undeniable. You had done what generations of people had said was impossible. You stepped into a courtroom designed to favor riches and left demonstrating that intellect, heart, and divine preparation can deconstruct power systems more efficiently than any legal firm. The reporters praised your calm attitude, precise probing, and amazing ability to transform dry evidence into an engaging tale. However, they could never fully portray the deeper metamorphosis, how mourning cleansed your purpose. You had come into the fight feeling shattered, doubting your own power and wondering if you could actually confront these titans in their own arena. However, at the end, you had grown into something far larger than you could have dreamed. Not a litigator, not a reformer, but a living example of what occurs when the human spirit, connected to God, refuses to give up. You left the courts that day with not only your inheritance, but also a legacy that would last for centuries. Your narrative became a beacon of hope for every underdog, self-taught fighter, and soul who has ever felt powerless in the face of a faceless bureaucracy. It becomes a whispered encouragement for the next person standing precisely where you once did, alone, afraid, and totally determined. And maybe the most striking aspect of it all was that you didn't simply battle for your grandmother's wishes. You embodied it. You were her living testimony, her strength, her integrity, her unequivocal sense of right and wrong. She passed down more than simply possessions. She also passed down bravery. And you demonstrated to the world that the greatest inheritance does not necessarily take the shape of money. Sometimes it takes the shape of fire, the type that burns through falsehoods and illuminates the path for others to follow. You went out not only as a winner, but as someone who redefined what it means to win. You are no longer only the name on a legal document. You're a force, a precedent, a heavenly reminder that when love, knowledge, and justice come together, no system, institution, or opponent can stand a chance. This is the power that exists inside you. This is your fate if you choose to fight for the truth. If this narrative has sparked a fire in your spirit, we invite you to not only subscribe to God Connection, but also to become an active participant in our goal. Please help us distribute these messages of optimism and empowerment. For those who feel compelled to help, consider utilizing the Super Thanks button to make a $10 gift or any amount you feel comfortable with. Your support is more than simply a gift. It is an investment in truth, one that allows us to generate more material like this and reach individuals all over the world who need to be reminded of their own strength. Dear Father, I pray for the deepening of my faith and the faith of those who listen. Help me and them to believe in you, even when tangible proof is absent and the route ahead is uncertain. Allow me to believe in your eternal presence, knowing with total certainty that you will never hurt me, for you are a God of love and protection. I hold firmly to your promise that your thoughts for me are ones of success rather than harm, that you would offer me a future and hope. Thank you, kind and eternal Father, for constantly hearing my voice and those of your children. I pray to you in the holy and mighty name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your unconditional love and divine provision. I will be eternally thankful for your presence in my life and the plenty you provide, not just in terms of riches, but also in strength, knowledge, and calm. If this video spoke to you profoundly, please like, subscribe to God Connection, and share it with others who need to hear this message of strength and divine justice. Leave a comment below about your personal experience and how you're getting ready for your victorious homecoming despite the odds. Every sharing, remark, and prayer helps to spread God's message and provide hope to others. Thank you for staying with us to the end. Keep shining brightly and face your fate with the courage of a warrior. We will see you next time. God Connection sends blessings to all lovely people.